Welcome to the Holiness Today podcast. On this episode, listen to a recording from Discipleship Place, hosted by John Comstock. In this conversation, Phil Burkhart, Jordan Guthrie, Shaun McClellan, Noel, Sharon Norman, and Nick Robertson discuss the nuts and bolts of worship for the local church.
We're going to go first to Nick Robertson and Sharon Norman. And Nick and Sharon, I'm going to have you introduce yourself to everybody when you get started with answering the question. But the first question we want to ask you is, why is it important for the lead pastor and the worship leader to communicate regularly about worship? So I'd love for you to respond to that after your introductions.
Awesome. Thank you, John, and thank you to all of you that have joined this webinar. I'm so grateful for John's work in putting this together and for the Church of the Nazarene seeing the value in us all coming together as worship pastors and pastors across the denomination. Just to be a part of this, and to all my colleagues that are here that have prepared, and as we've worked together through these questions and our own experiences, it's just been amazing. My name is Nick Robertson. I'm at Bethany First Church of the Nazarene in Oklahoma City. Been here about 2 years, and family and I live in Edmond, which is just outside of OKC, and we're just really enjoying life and ministry here. Not so much the severe weather that happens in this part of the country, but life and ministry here is very good. And I'm honored to share in this question with Sharon Norman. So Sharon, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So Sharon Norman, I am co-lead pastor at Journey of Grace Church of the Nazarene. My focus is on worship and preaching. And so Journey of Grace is one of the newer congregations in the Church of the Nazarene, as we planted 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago. So, and I too am looking forward to having this question with my good brother, Nick.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Had a lot of fun in preparing this question. I'm going to share my screen really quickly here. And just going back to the question really quickly, why is it important for the lead pastor and the worship leader to communicate regularly about worship? And reading this question, we thought about a couple of different things that come to mind. First, just as we get started with all of this, let's define what worship is. And I know that can look different ways in each of our various contexts. And then number two, in order to be able to communicate regularly and effectively, the relationship between the senior pastor and the worship pastor needs to be cultivated. So let's talk about worship, and let's talk about that relationship. So defining worship, it's important to, as worship pastors and pastors, senior pastors, to define worship, to emphasize to our worship team and congregation that worship is not just singing, way more than that. Worship is not a performance from a platform. Worship is giving praise, honor, and glory to God through the reading of His Word, teaching and learning, prayer, participation in the sacraments, singing, a proclamation of His goodness, and testimonies, and being active in the mission of God in the world. In the book Worship on Earth as It Is in Heaven by Rory Nolan, he says, as believers, worship is not merely something that we do, it is who we are. And he goes on to say, at its most basic level, worship is an exciting opportunity and a holy invitation to enjoy God. And once we have established what worship is, and hopefully come to a mutual understanding of that, we can determine what is most important in the communication between the lead pastor and the worship leader. The lead pastor, the relationship between the senior pastor and the worship pastor, It's one of the most visible relationships within the church, is that of the senior pastor and the worship pastor. So we want to be very mindful of how that looks, and great communication between the lead pastor and worship pastor regarding worship in the church provides great synergy in ministry. And we'll break that down just a little bit. The concept of synergy in ministry is crucial to the elimination of confusion in the church. It's coming together and believing in the same things in ministry, and working together and cultivating our strengths and focusing on those. The worship pastor is helping to make sure that the Word of God is being highlighted in the service. Prayer for one another should be at the core of the relationship. Meetings and or calls and texts throughout the week before the service begins are crucial. And collaboration on making sure the Word of God is at the core of the service and overflows into the songs that we sing. Lifting up the pastor in prayer as a worship team. Recognize and honor each other in private and public. All these things are wonderful in cultivating that relationship between the worship pastor and pastor. If there's going to be synergy in the worship ministry of the church, the pastor and worship pastor must be formed and shaped by the Word together. So talk through theological points of view. And we do that because it's crucial to our development, right? We do that because it's crucial to the development of the worship service. Okay, what are people going to walk away with? Are they going to understand or have a better understanding of grace, or whatever the topic may be, or whatever the scripture was for that day? It's crucial to the development of the congregation's spiritual life as well. So having those conversations between you and the senior pastor are crucial. Focus on each other's strengths and cultivate them, but be open and honest about your shortcomings. How important is that? That we understand, if as I'm the worship pastor and my pastor is Pastor Rick Harvey, I know now kind of what Pastor Rick's strengths are. He knows what my strengths are. I've confided in him on what my weaknesses are, in terms of, it might be in planning or anything to do in worship ministry or administration. And so we help each other in those regards. Very, very needed in this relationship. And I want to talk to you about just a real interesting concept when it comes to this relationship that you have with each other, about running to the fear, because ministry is messy so many times, right? We deal with so many things from different people in our congregation, and we help them walk through moments of grief and different aspects, right? So we want to, I mentioned to you my family, and I live in Edmond, and my wife and I have 4 boys. And this concept of run to the fear, I found out with our youngest son, Bennett, who one day, I'm playing like hide and go seek with I've played that with all my boys, right? And so, but something was different about Bennett, our youngest. Whenever I would pop out and try to scare the boys, the other boys would kind of run away, right? Well, Bennett had this response to him that was unlike the others, where if I would jump out and scare him, he would run to the fear. I mean, fist clenched, run at me. And I think that's a neat concept. I thought about that in regards to the church. As worship pastors and senior pastors work together in the church, in the messiness of all of that, being able to run to the fear together, and again, understanding our strengths and our weaknesses, very important. as we dive into those things and not cowering back. But it's so important that we run to those things and tackle those unique concepts and things that come about in the church that really helps the church grow, and it provides great leadership in times of crisis as well. And so we understand each other better when we tackle those things together. And so one of the things that talked about with Sharon, she's going to jump in here and talk about is, we need to check in regularly, and with trends changing and everything happening so rapidly, it's important that we talk about those things. So Sharon, share with us about that.
So to really tie in this idea of trends changing, Nick, if you don't mind going back one slide,
Sure.
where we talk about being formed and shaped by the word together, our theology. Theology and practice can sometimes be two different things. Like we preach or we speak a theology, but then we live a different idea, right? Or even believe some things that aren't necessarily in line with the theology that we say we are going to celebrate. And so, as Wesleyans, with our very clear doctrines and beliefs that we have, sometimes when in the hiring process, there are not a lot of full-time worship pastor positions. That actually is kind of shifting in another way. And many churches have seen that. And so they might get someone part-time. Well, trying to get someone part-time, there are times when you are pulling from within a community, and it may not even be from another Nazarene church. That was my example coming into the Nazarene church. I was from a Baptist church, and Joe Knight took a chance that our relationship will work well together, right? But the way it worked well together, if I was going to be in this theological setting, which missionary Baptist and Nazarene aren't as far from what you think, but when you hear the word Baptist and Nazarene, those two don't go together because of the Calvinist background and the Wesleyan background. But ours was closer than we think, but we spent time really developing what that meant. Like when it comes to singing a song like Come Thou Fount, am I fine with changing that third verse instead of saying prone to wander, right? Because we know theologically from our Nazarene understanding, we won't necessarily say prone to wander. It's things like that really do those what could be minute really become super important, because as we go through our own experiences, if I am still living in whatever camp that I came from and whatever theological thinking that I came from, and I am not in coherence with with pastor, with just where we are as a church, it is very easy for me as the worship leader or pastor to get sidetracked by other things that don't help move us to fulfilling our mission and vision. And that is the goal. Like at the end of the day, the relationship that we have as a staff, as a team, is really for the goal of being unified in this one mission and vision that we have that God has called us to. So, when it comes to being formed and shaped by the word of God together, it becomes really important, especially if your worship pastor comes from outside of the tradition that we're from. It's super important. And again, I lived it, so that's why I'll speak to it. Even if they come from inside of the tradition, I have learned just from watching my own children navigate space that although we teach a very clear thing, as life hits, and when life hit different, sometimes it can be like, well, did God really mean it that way? Or does it really need to go like this? And so those are questions we have had with our 15-year-old and our 19-year-old as they are navigating, as their theology is coming face to face with things that they practice in life, right? And so we are no different as we start navigating, how easy is it for us to forget our sabbatical because we are knee deep, or not sabbatical, Sabbath, because we are knee deep in Easter planning. Like, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy is the same no matter what time of the year it is. But how easy is it for us to get sidetracked in those things? So my point in sharing all that, you can go forward now, Nick. When we talk about that regular check-in because trends change, there are things that may be happening with us individually. So you may be in a certain devotional or doing a certain practice that is just moving your heart, or you may hear a certain song that just blesses you completely. I think with those regular check-ins, when we come together, we can discern if what's happening to us in our private personal time with God is something that's just for us or something that God is desiring to draw out for the body. And oftentimes the way we know that is there is a connection of what's happening amongst our team. Like, God don't operate in a silo. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. He don't operate in a silo, right? And so we shouldn't either. And so if God is moving us, trying that out on a Sunday morning because it blessed your private closet may not be the route you want to take if there hasn't been the time to sit and talk through, like, how is God speaking to you, or how is God dealing with you? And you may find, yes, God is saying this to us as a body, not just the individual. But when we check in regularly, we can kind of hash those things out. Or maybe God did say something to you that needs to be heard in the greater, in the context of the community. And oftentimes when we can speak into that with each other, it helps to clarify where God is leading totally for all of us, not just us individually.
Awesome. Thank you, Sharon. John?
Thank you, Sharon and Nick. That's really great. And you answered a lot of things around the why question. And I want to move to a what question. And we're going to have Shaun and Jordan and Michelle answer the what question. And the what question is around a weekly debrief and what that looks like. So Michelle and Jordan, if you don't mind, again, introduce yourself, but talk to us about the essential outcomes of service review and how that all plays out on a weekly basis.
Yeah, thanks, John. And thanks, Nick and Sharon. That was so wonderful and super important. I was making notes as you were saying things. It was so important, the things you were saying. First of all, I'm Michelle Noel. I live in Columbia, Tennessee, and I've been at Columbia Grace for 9 years this year as the worship pastor here. I love this place. I love these people. Such a joy to be here. Jordan, you want to introduce yourself so we don't forget?
I'm Jordan Guthrie. I'm the worship pastor at Trevecca Community Church in Nashville, Tennessee. I've been here for almost 10 years, and my wife and I live in Hermitage, just outside of Nashville. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, so what does a good weekly debrief look like? What are the essential outcomes of a service review? So, and first things first, Nick and Sharon hit so great on that, the importance of that senior pastor, worship pastor relationship. But as you step off of Sunday, Monday is always coming, as is Sunday. The cycle, just we live in the weekly cycle. But on Monday, I know for me, that's our time to debrief with my senior pastor, with my lead pastor, Pastor Jason Caddy. We take time to debrief the service. And I think we, over the past few years, we've been working alongside each other, have found our own rhythms and questions that we ask one another. And I think probably this might be different for each of us, as we're all in different settings, we're at different churches. Some of us have one service, some of us have multiple services. So these questions might look a little bit different for each of us, depending on your setting. But a few things that I feel like each of us can be mindful of as we talk through what is a good debrief of Sundays look like, because it is important to talk about Sunday, and it's quick to just get into a rhythm of moving on to the next week. But it's important to talk through what just happened so that we can learn and grow. And so I really think the first question, the first thing that we need to be mindful of, it'll be easy to step into Monday and talk about what went wrong. When you leave on Sunday mornings, I know it's so easy to dwell on the things that crashed and burned, or the things that I want to do better the next week. But I am continually trying to reorient my brain to ask, was God honored in what we did on Sunday? That is the most crucial question we can be asking ourselves. Was God honored in what we did? Were we obedient in how God was asking us to lead our people each and every week? And sometimes things crash and burn, and God was still honored. He's a lot bigger than we sometimes seem to forget. And so, was God honored in what we did? Were our people's gazes lifted upward through our service, through the songs that we sing, through the words that we declared, through the scriptures that we said? That is such a crucial question to ask. And it reminds us too that it's not about us. It's not about our mistakes and even the things that we did well. It gets our focus off of ourselves and realigns us to the object of our worship, which is God. And so as worship is a response to who he is, I think it's important that we ask ourselves that question the first thing when we come in on Monday morning for a debrief, and then the conversation flows from there. So after we talk through that and see what that looks like in our setting, some, other crucial questions that I think we have to be asking are, what worked in the service? What were the things that just flowed really well, that the people responded to well? Maybe we tried something new. Maybe we did communion at this part of the service instead of this part of the service. Did it work? Was it kind of maybe not the best placement? Should we do something different? Those types of questions. What worked well and what didn't work well? And then from that, I feel like you naturally have this question of, what can we improve next week or next time that we do this? And I know for my setting at Columbia, I think the dreaded word COVID changed a lot of our service structure and things that we did. We once used to pass the plate. We passed the plate around for offering, and then suddenly that's like not even in the service anymore. We have different ways to give. And so as things change and shift, you're going to find that there'll be different elements of the service. And so what worked well? What did the people respond to well? And how can we improve? And another big question that I know that I have, this one has been something that for me, I ask myself every week. And I actually think is such an important question to ask as worship pastors. But are the people singing? Did they sing last week? And I remember one time, Jordan, maybe we had talked about this. He said, I need to take a Sunday and just stand in the congregation, because I don't know if you're wearing in-ears, but sometimes you're not hearing. And so maybe having people in the congregation, or if you're not on ears, listening to the people. Are the people singing? Because, man, this is such a crucial component, because as worship pastors, I think of that verse in Ephesians 5:19 that says, be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another with psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit. Sing and make music from your heart to the Lord. I love that passage. As we sing, as we communally gather on Sunday mornings, as we worship and sing next to one another, I tell our congregation all the time, it's so important that we sing, because as we declare a word, let's say we're singing, I've seen you move the mountains, and I believe I'll see you do it again. The person next to us needs to hear you singing that in faith, that you've seen God move mountains, and you believe in faith that he'll do it again. And the person next to you might not believe it, and they need to hear you singing in faith, which it stirs up their faith. And so that's why singing is so important. We were created to sing. We've been called to sing. We've been commanded to sing. Through the Psalms, over and over again, we hear, sing to the Lord a new song. Sing, sing, sing. That call to sing is often repeated. And so if our congregation is not singing, then in my opinion, we're not doing what we've been called to do. So we have to make sure our people are singing. And if they're not singing, why aren't they singing? Are the melodies confusing? Are we doing too many new songs each week? There could be lots of reasons, but asking ourselves that question each week is super important. I think of one specific instance at Grace Church. We had a really difficult week. We lost a volunteer really suddenly to a heart attack, and someone who was very faithful. He was there every single week. And I remember the next week that we came back together for corporate worship as the body of Christ. He was my band leader. He was so special to me, and I was a disaster. And I remember that Sunday, I couldn't sing a single word. And it's not because I didn't want to, but it's because I physically couldn't get any sound to come out of my mouth because I was so emotional and just grieving. And this day is burned in my memory. It's like an altar in my brain, an altar of remembrance. The church sang so loudly that morning. I'll never forget it. I would kind of guide them into the song, and then they would take it away and sing. And that was the day that I really understood the power of a church that sings and edifies one another and admonishes one another and lifts one another up. So if our people aren't singing, that's something to really ask ourselves each and every week. Why weren't they singing? And then just any awkward moments. Were there any awkward moments in the service that maybe we need to figure out why? How can we do things differently? And I know I kind of hit on that before, but those are some of the questions to ask. And I'm actually going to pass it off to Jordan now.
Nice. That's awesome. That's great stuff, Michelle. So just a few more largely practical things to talk about and what this weekly debrief looks like with your lead pastor. Michelle just talked about some technical difficulties, or some awkward moments. Technical difficulties are a part of that. Maybe a screen went out or a mic didn't come on. I mean, we have all been there probably several times on Sunday when a mic was supposed to be unmuted and wasn't, and something happened, one reason or another. So just some of those logistical, technical things to work out, just so you can address it, because there's almost nothing that can just wreck the momentum or the spirit in a service than like a technical difficulty. And so as worship leaders, as worship pastors, that's one of our responsibilities. It's not just to be the one up front singing, but it's also to help take care of those details and prepare so that on a Sunday morning or whenever your church is singing together in a service, those distractions are eliminated. So this is just all part of that. And your lead pastor, maybe they sit on the front row, maybe they sit somewhere else, but they have a unique perspective during the service that we do not have. So that's a key thing to discuss in those weekly debriefs. Another thing to do is to talk about, are there ways to celebrate something that happened? For example, last November, we included kids in our choir for the very first time. And we had one of our kids lead an arrangement of Blessed Assurance, and she crushed it. And it was so good. And so we talked in our debrief, how do we let Jovi know that she was just incredible? How do we steward her talent well? How do we make sure that she knows that just wasn't a one-off token experience, but she is a worship leader in our church? So there are things like that, whether it's a leader of a song or a video that was created, you want to give a shout out to your media team, whatever that might be. Talk about that. How can we celebrate and encourage our team through all those things? Next, it's really important. We meet on Mondays. I meet with my lead pastor on Mondays, and we talk about the direction for the upcoming Sunday, where she's going with her sermon. And oftentimes on Monday, she might have a good idea, but she doesn't really know until Thursday. And just, I'm not great at math, but that's after Wednesday. That's after rehearsal. So the part of the debrief is just discussing like, hey, were we on the same page? Did the songs we sing, the prayers that we prayed, the readings that we read, did all of that land in the same direction? Are we on the same page in the way we're leading our people? You know, point A being the entrance, whatever that opening moment of the service. Point B being the end of the service. There's a journey there through the service that we kind of take our congregation along for. And we just want to make sure, are we forking? Is the road forking from A to B? Are we on the same page? Are we doing a good job on that? Yes, Michelle mentioned earlier, you know, maybe we tried communion in a different spot. We take communion every week here at our church. And it feels like about once a month we have to adjust where the stations are for intinction and where our servers are. So it's just a constant thing. You know, maybe the traffic flow as people are getting up to go receive communion is wonky. We might need to take out a chair in this section just to widen the aisle, or, you know, things like that. You can address those with your lead pastor as well. Is there anything worth trying again or differently? I've tried things that I don't ever want to talk about again in a service that, man, they just crashed and burned. Some of those things were worth trying again. Just like, hey, you know, we didn't quite nail the execution, but the idea is great. I think that's going to, let's tweak it the way we execute it next time. And some of those things we'll never discuss. You know, it's like, yeah, that crashed and burned, and we'll move on from that. This truly is a time for you to reflect with your lead pastor about what's happening in your corporate gatherings. So pay attention to the room. You know, we just listed a bunch of questions. There are other things that are worth asking, maybe that are more specific to your context, that maybe don't work for everybody's context. So just do what you can and make your lead pastor aware. Have eyes and ears. Maybe that's one more thing that you don't want to have to worry about when you're leading the service or your lead pastor does it. Maybe there's some trusted board members or people from your team who are off that week who can be your eyes and ears and help you kind of get a feel for how things are moving in your worship space so that you can talk about it. Otherwise, we're just planning concerts and TED Talks and moving through it and just churning out service after service after service. But instead, let's treat this as leaders, as pastors, as stewards of people, and just make sure that we're stewarding that time well. You know, I've heard people talk about Sunday mornings, the greatest hour of the week or something like that. You know, it can be. So let's make sure that when we're debriefing with our lead pastor, that those are things that we're considering, so that not only are we making it worth it for people to be there, but also we're stewarding people faithfully. We're discipling them faithfully. We're giving them opportunities to share their testimony in song. We're giving them opportunities to participate in the sacraments, all those things. So just really, really do what you can to pay attention to those things. Just in the last thing I'll mention about that, we have 4 questions each week in staff meeting that we ask. These are questions that our pastor, Shaun Gaines, has used for years. Maybe these worked for you. They work really well for us, but tweak them. Maybe you can come up or consider coming up with some questions that you just ask. It's part of your rhythm to really get a feel for what happened. So those 4 questions are, what happened? So we ask that every week. What happened this week? Let's just talk about it. Give a report. What happened? The second thing is, what surprised us? That's a good way to ask. Well, it didn't work very well, but it also maybe surprised in a good way. The third thing is, based on those, what happened and what surprised you, what did we learn? And then the fourth thing is, and I think it's the most important question to consider in all of those, is what might God be up to? Taking all of this information into mind, what happened, what surprised us and what we learned, try and figure out what God is up to in all this. So as you're looking toward the next Sunday, you're stewarding well, you're planning well, you're caring for your people well, and doing it faithfully in the way that God has called us to do. Awesome. John?
That's great. I love it. And thank you, Jordan and Michelle. We're going to move to another question. And I do want to just pause real quick and let you know, I think some of you are putting questions in. We will take time for questions close to the top of the hour. So just be aware of that. Feel free to type those into the Q&A. Shaun and Sharon, talk to us about what it looks like as you're having these conversations with your pastor, lead pastor, and God's speaking into them, and you're trying to put that together in a service order. How do you do that? What does that look like? So Shaun, and I think you need to introduce yourself. So you're the last one to introduce yourself, and then you can take it from there.
Thanks, John. Hey, it's so good to be with everybody today. And I'm coming to you from a new place. I've been here all of 52 days in a new assignment in Oro Valley, Arizona. So we're South Arizona, the Tucson area. And we'd spent a long time at Denver First Church of the Nazarene. I went through a season transitioning that church to really the point where it was a brand new church plant. It's now One Hope Church of the Nazarene in Littleton, Colorado. And so as a part of that assignment, the Lord said, hey, Shaun, I need you to help the church turn the corner. And so we spent a lot of time there getting to a great and healthy place. And now we're at a brand new work where I'm actually an executive pastor on the team here. I help oversee our worship arts teams, our communication team, and special projects that we're going to be involved in. So it's exciting and it's all new, but it's one of my favorite things to talk about pastors and worship leaders. So I'm going to share my screen here and we'll dive in for just a moment. All right. So I notice the question that I started with here, or the statement is capturing, right, the pastor's heart, right? It's both and. It is not just, we got to do everything that the senior or lead pastor wants. And I understand more than as much as anybody that we want to honor and work with and elevate our lead pastor. And at the same time, it is a relationship that goes both ways. So I'm just going to say, there are no shortcuts to getting to the kind of results that Michelle and Jordan talked about and Nick talked about, where we're in a relationship where we're running toward the fear together. Like that just doesn't happen because we're on a staff together. And I think, if we're going to build relationships, I think my first question is, what are you talking about outside of your service order? Because we're talking about getting to know somebody's heart and capturing somebody's heart in an order of worship and a service. Well, if you don't know the heart of the person, how can you even begin to have that conversation? Or it's only going to go to a certain level. So, I've got a great friend that it has incredible podcast that talks about the 10,000 minutes a week, right? There's 80 minutes that we spend doing church, but then there's 10,000 minutes that are left over. And how are we building that relationship with each other? Because without relational equity, it's going nowhere. And Sharon, I want you to just hop in and maybe share your perspective on that for a minute, because I know you're a co-pastor, and I want you to just talk a little bit about the importance of doing this together if we're really going to capture somebody's heart when it comes to designing a service order.
So I think one of the first things I'll always go back to is, what is the vision and mission of your church? Of what is God said, this is the way, walk in it. Because what we do really should lead us in that direction. So when things start to go left of center of that, then those are questions to be asked. Like, how is this helping us to achieve the vision that God has given us? And every church is different, right? So there are some churches where there may be a small group that helps to discern that. For others, it may be the pastoral staff plus the church board. It could be all of those things. And so I think, again, I go back to, as you are considering that, if we are all focusing on one vision, mission, then it becomes super important that those things align. When it comes to if we take it that layer down, like, what is the pastor saying that they feel led in as the corporate body for this week? What is their heart for that? What are they saying to you? And here's the thing. The thing about us worship arts people, we're creative, right? I mean, we can build towers and massive buildings in a worship service. And the pastor, is that really what, his heart is speaking towards? So it becomes important to come really with a listening ear to the hope for that week. Now, I get that there are some places, some pastors who, I love how Jordan put it, where he said, she gives us something to go with, like at the beginning, but it may not be fully formulated by Thursday. Some of you have a pastor who the ink is still dry on Sunday morning. And that's just a very real thing. And to that, I go back to, what is the vision, the mission, and the values of your church? And what are we going to do on Sunday to help us point us in that direction? And so that's always a safe place for a worship pastor to be when there's not necessarily clarity from the senior pastor, because that can happen. And so that's where I'll stop right there, Shaun, so you can keep going.
That perspective is so good. It is so helpful. If we're not living by understanding the values of who we are and how they represent the core of who we are, then we're lost, and it's not going to take very long for us to get off track. So it's so important. I appreciate that perspective. Our friends had talked about this idea of reserving a consistent time, and I'm not going to spend more time on that. All I'm going to say is honor that. Honor the time that you've set aside. So, I know not everybody here is on a staff or is paid, or if your debrief looks like, if it looks like an email, honor the email. Whatever the avenue or vehicle is for communication, don't just say, we'll catch it later, or it's not important, or it doesn't matter, because as soon as we become dismissive in that, then it feels like the importance of the relationship, it becomes eroded just a little bit. And if we miss one session and we miss another check-in and another one, it really, I believe, has a long-term effect to the amount of relational equity that we're able to build. So I say honor that time. I mean, if you can't meet, you can't meet, but say something. Say, hey, I am really sorry. I look forward to our meetings, and I know we need to touch base. I don't have the time right now, but can we find another time to do it? So that's all I'm going to say about that. But if we don't honor it, Sharon, come on, somebody, right? I mean, talk to me about just for a second why that matters.
Well, I think it says a lot about what we value. And I get life happens, right? Life happens. We have kids, we have spouses. If we're bivocational, I'm bivocational, so I absolutely get it. But if we believe that 80 minutes is one of the, as Jordan said, one of the most important, impactful days of the week and times of the week, then we got to invest in it. There's no cutting corners on that. You can't dial in a song, Sunday morning, hey, heard this song, we're just going to listen to it, or, try to pull pieces together. It becomes incredibly stressful. And honestly, if you have a worship leader or a pastor that is frazzled before the service begins, it becomes an uphill battle for the Holy Spirit to work freely. It is what it is. Now, some would say, I work best under pressure. No, you taught yourself that. I need somebody to give me an amen on that. You have taught yourself that. It is what it is. And so, I realize that, and I come from a background of spontaneity, but if you've lived in that, it isn't necessarily because it's just how I'm wired. No, we've taught ourselves that, right? And with anything we've been taught, we can unlearn. Like the Holy Spirit can speak to you today about next week. The Holy Spirit has that ability. And we need to stop acting like he waits to the last minute. He don't always do that. Sometimes we just don't hear him until we're ready to sit still and allow him to speak, and then we respond. So, there really are no shortcuts to this. Make time for it, make space for it, because if you want it to be successful, it will be, if not even successful, if you want the Spirit to have the permission, the ability to move, the freedom to move in any setting, you cannot cut things out because, I'm overtaxed or I'm overbusy. It will show up. And if we look at other areas of our lives where we've had to have this conversation, I'm sure we've seen the same thing. Like there are no shortcuts. Reminds me of a conversation that I had with my teenager about her homework. There's no shortcut. You are not, this faith and works. Come on, somebody help me. Faith and works is a very real thing. You can't say, oh, I believe the Lord gonna help me to remember these lyrics, and you never took the time to memorize the lyric. It doesn't always work that way. Faith without works is dead. So you got to put something in order if you even think you're going to come close to getting some back. And is he gracious? Absolutely. But why are we just relying on this grace that because we decided to cut a corner to get to a destination that we think he wants?
On my screen right now, Sharon, I got two ordained ministers on there. Can you tell me which one is the worship pastor and which one is the lead pastor? Come on, that's all I'm saying. I just love this picture. We're working hard on an order here. So let's talk a little bit about the things that we value. In these meetings, we've got to share our expectations. That's one of the things that I feel like we just keep to ourselves the most is like, hey, I know what I expect, and I know that I get upset when you don't meet it. But if we never take the time to express those things, we are in serious trouble. So, if we're talking about what does a service need to feel like and how to get a pastor's heart onto a service order, we need to say, hey, look, I expect that Easter is going to feel like a regular weekend that sets a realistic expectation for what we're going to do every Sunday. If Easter is flying angels for the pastor, then, hey, we better figure out a way to rig up some wires real quick, right? So I think you've got to express what the expectation is if you're going to capture the worship director's heart, if you're going to capture the senior pastor's heart, it has to be expressed. What does that service need to feel like? And this is an actual conversation that we had here at the church just a couple of weeks ago in terms of expectations around Easter. This idea of what winning looks like on Sunday, what service order looks like, I think both the lead pastor and the worship director have to ask and answer of each other, what do you expect this service to look like? Right? Again, because this is something that we live in mutuality. This is something that we're putting together and there's no shortcuts. And if we're not asking these questions, I might have an expectation about something and I'm like, there is no time for my pastor or my worship pastor. They never hear me correctly. It's never what I want it to be. And it's just like, have you talked about it? Do we get to answer the same question? And then this goes into like thematic planning. Like, so are there key takeaways? Are there certain scriptures that we want to use? Is there a desired response? And if a pastor has a desired response, worship director, you got to help facilitate that. But in order for it to actually happen, there has to be a discussion around thematic planning elements. Mm-hmm. So, it's like we have a service and our pastor's like, hey, if there's not a hymn or a hymn-like song in this service, it is not a win for us, right? So we're talking about, in order to capture the pastor's heart, that we've got to have a certain style of music in there and it's going to be there. And sometimes I've worked with pastors that want to use props and who needs a microphone and who needs to talk. And we could totally deal with those things on the fly on Sundays. And Lord knows that I've done it 100 times where it's just like, oh, I didn't know that was happening today. And oh, I didn't know that was happening today. However, there is the power of shared expectation where we say, hey, look, this is important to me that you understand what I want to have happen this day and that we're on the same page together. So talking about being on the same page, Jordan, I'm going to take a page out of your book. You talked about your questions in your staff meeting, and I wanted to share our 3 from our staff meeting. The first one is always, who did you meet? Who did you have a conversation with this Sunday? Because that's a value of our church, is that we are engaged in real conversations with people that attend our church. The second one is, how did you move the ball down the court? Like, what are you working on? What's important to you? How are we moving forward so that we can be on the same page? And the third question is a follow-up to that, and that's what you need. What do you need to move that ball better? What do you need to move that ball more efficiently? What do you need from me? So it's a resourcing question. And then I think along the lines of expectations too is really this idea of a service order and a flow. Do we have a conversation where can this ever change, right? So there's the quote that we refer to about unity and essentials and liberty and non-essentials. So like, There's certain things where it's like, hey, if we don't have this in our service, it's just not going to work. It's not, like Sharon, what you said, it's not, it doesn't feel like it's aligned with the values of our church. But, let's talk about too, where we have liberty, and let's talk about the things that we might be able to try out, but let's actually have a conversation about it. Let's honor it, and let's dive in together and build the relational equity that's required to have meaningful conversations like that. I think that's, I don't want to get too much into debriefing. I know we had a note about debriefing, whether or not the pastor's heart and the worship director's heart was captured. And all I want to say about that is keep it kingdom. About Michelle, what you said so well, in our conversations, keep it kingdom, and remember what we're doing and what the perspective is all about. Sharon, you want a last word on that?
Nope, that was good.
Cool. Thanks, John.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. And, the thought comes to me, and we're going to move to Nick here just a second. As I listen, what I'm hearing a lot that keeps coming back to me in my mind is this is not about having transactional relationships that's functional. What you guys are describing are discipling relationships. Like, these are really not just functions we perform for each other in a transactional way. They're really life on life. Like, this is discipleship. Everything you're describing is about discipleship in the end. And then out of that discipleship, our worship flows from that together. And that's really powerful to me as I listen to just this aha moment of that. It's really beautiful. Nick, let's come to you. I want you to talk a little bit in some practical ways about resources and systems that are available. And then we have one more question that we're going to go to Jordan and Michelle just to close off, and then we'll take Q&A. But let's go to you first, and let's talk about some resources and systems that are available to prepare worship teams and churches for worship. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Nick, for that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I had the privilege of working on this with Phil Burkhart, who again, is not with us because of a funeral, in case you're just joining us on that. And so appreciate Phil's work on this as well. Systems and resources. We're kind of turning a little bit of a page here and going like super practical. And I'm just going to briefly list some resources that we'll start off with here. And I'll specifically talk about worship teams, meaning, everything except for choir. And I'll get to choir in case you're on here and you have a choir like we do at our church. But worship teams, there's several resources. I think most people have always heard of praise charts. If you're paying CCLI dues, there's an opportunity for you to also be a part of Song Select, which gets you free chord charts. Or it's not free, I guess you're paying for it, but through your membership. But chord charts, lead sheets, some very minimal resources there for a lot of songs. So that's a great treasure trove of resources there. And then, of course, if your worship team is used to using ClickTrack, Multitracks, literally multitracks.com, is a little more on the expensive side. Loop Community is coming out of various church ministries and providing the tracks that they have made. Just super quickly, and everybody on our panel knows that I work with Lilianus, our Church of the Nazarene publishing side, and I got with Lilianus, and this is a real QR code right here on your screen. I invite you to scan that at any point. Of course, I know that we're recording this, and that scan is going to take you to something brand new from Lilianus, which is called Quick Charts. And it's a resource for chord charts, lead sheets in multiple keys, piano vocal charts, multi-tracks are a part of that. And we're recording that all right here in OKC, partnering with Southern Nazarene University in that. And so we're really excited. It's brand new. So I think we have 5 songs up, and we have 5 more coming in the next couple of weeks. But that scan can lead you there. And Lilinas is offering today and tomorrow coupon code there, QC35, 35% off on Quick Charts. And so if you want to take advantage of that, I'll leave that there for you. And of course, I know this QR code will be a part of the recording later. You can come back and grab that. Okay. If you have choirs, just super quickly, obviously Lilinas with the Church of the Nazarene, got to put that first. All right. Simpson Music is out there. Prism Music, Brentwood Benson is back. Word is not putting out new music, but they are still available and have lots of arrangements for your church choir. J.W. Pepper kind of encompasses a lot of different companies, and they sell a lot of resources there. So lots to do there for choirs if that's a part of your ministry. Continuing with resources, I've just listed out several books that the worship pastor and the senior pastor should take a look at. Anything from Dr. Dan Boone in terms of worship planning is great. Preaching, Dr. Vernon Whaley's at Trevecca Nazarene University has Called to Worship. There's several resources here. And just because of time, I'm not going to list all of these. But as I said, as this is being recorded, you can come back and grab these titles later, or if I have a second, I'll just drop those in the chat as well. Worship pastor and worship teams. These are some books that you could use for your team to get on the same page about worship leading. Developing you and your team. There's a worship initiative from Shane and Shane, Worship Arts Collective, Church Front, obviously going to conferences and just really investing in yourself and having your church have the ability to invest in you and sending you out to a conference to be a part of that. Experience Conference is great. There's Sing. I know there's so many more. If any of you want to drop in the chat what you have found most helpful in that regard. And then really quickly on technology, and all of you know, I've seen our participants today. There's many worship leader veterans in the chat today, but also you might be brand new and not know any of this stuff. Obviously, Planning Center is a big deal in terms of volunteer management and service preparation. We use that a lot. Presentation software, you have your pick. ProPresenter, obviously becoming, or is probably already kind of the main one that most people are using, a little bit more expensive. Easy Worship, Prezi, Proclaim, and of course, PowerPoint and Keynote are a couple of the other ones. Just continuing on with technology here, Stock Graphics, Igniter Media, Worship House Media, Church Motion Graphics, Share Faith, Pixel Preacher, and Renewed Vision, which is pro content through ProPresenter as well. Just if you need to find some gear, some very practical things, Sweetwater has great sales reps that can help you in that regard. Full Compass sales reps, Musician's Friend, American Musical Supply, and B&H Photo and Video. You might be on here and it's much more than just planning out the music for the service. You might be in charge of gathering communion supplies and anything that's needed for the church year. I've listed here the Foundry's got great resources to the Church of the Nazarene, Lifeway, Concordia, Cokesbury, Autumn, and Broadman, just to name a few. Those will help you gather resources. Like I said, communion, Advent candles, you name it, several different resources for you there. And then systems. I want to throw it to Shaun here for just a second. because I've admired what Shaun has done with his teams and developing his teams and just onboarding new people and getting them plugged in. Having a system is such a vital part of the worship ministry. And so, Shaun, give us your take on how important that is to you.
30 seconds. I'm just going to tell you that if you're doing ministry without some type of a vision and value statement, and then inviting people into those values with a covenant, you're missing God's best for your ministry. I believe that with all my heart. I teach it as often as I can. I share it with everybody who wants to listen. So if you're somebody who would like to know a little bit more about what does it take to develop something that captures my heart and my vision, and then invite people into a covenant statement about that, I'd love to talk to you about it, because then what happens is we don't start talking about issues and all the little things that drive us crazy. It goes back to Sharon, what we were talking about earlier. We're talking about values, because we know those values, we understand them, and we all want to live by them. So super important in leading a team.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shaun. We have just systems that have to do with weekly workflow, and my colleagues have already, talked a lot about planning and communication, administration, and care. And I want to talk about care just super quickly, especially as worship pastors, develop a system of care. This is so crucial. And one of the main things is to have a prayer team from within the worship team. And I'll tell you how I have this set up. It started within our choir, and honestly, I inherited this. Harlan Moore had a great system here. He's who I followed at Bethany First Church, and that continues to this day. A great prayer team within the worship team, and how we expanded it was I even went to Google Drive, and that's constantly updated with prayer requests and next steps for those prayer requests. But then also making sure that during your weekly times of rehearsal that you make space for prayer and testimonies. Such a crucial part here. If I put on here, if personal prayer time lifts us out of our circumstances and provides a clearer view of God and how he is moving and working, then corporate prayer time and coming together as a worship team is exponential in preparing our hearts and minds for worship. Another way that you can care for your team is get yourself ready and be prepared so that you can take care of your team on Sunday morning. So take care of yourself first, get there super early, and greet your team at the door too. If you've already got everything taken care of, wow, what an uplifting thing for them to get to the door and you're there to greet them, say it's going to be a great day today, excited for what the Lord's going to do. So just a real practical thing there. Sunday workflow, schedule of pre-service meetings, call times, rehearsals, all that can go into planning center, be sent out ahead of time so everybody's on the same page from production to a choir member, and clearly define the parameters for volunteers, and that will create so much less chaos and again, more synergy in ministry on Sunday mornings. John?
That's great. That's fantastic. Well, we are a little past the top of the hour. We're going to finish off with one more question. I do recognize that some of you might need to leave. Some of you are on a lunch hour or whatever. This is recorded, so you can come back to it if you do need to leave. We do understand that. We're going to finish this out with one more question and then some Q&A, and we'll try to wrap up as quickly as possible here. But I do want to also say, as you leave, if you do leave, there's a survey that you can take, and that's really important. One of the things that we're working on with this group, and Phil is included in that, he's not here today, is working on a course that we'll be providing for churches all around what we're discussing today and more. So this is just one part of that course, but your feedback and your help in shaping that is something that matters to us. And so if you'll just take some time, fill out that survey, it will help us a great deal, and we would appreciate that. So I want to go to this next question with Jordan and Michelle. So you guys are on the hot seat now, and we're going to switch to you. And this is thinking a little bit about the actual worship rehearsal and the components of that. So why don't you talk to us about that?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the first section here, just some really, really, really practical things. And these are essential components to include in your worship rehearsal. The first thing, charts, music, whether that's printed, digital, make sure that that's ready to go for people when rehearsal begins. I will confess to you that there have been rehearsals that I've shown up and I thought I was prepared, and maybe I've got the wrong arrangement in front of me or something like this. There's been a miscommunication about which version we're doing. And not only does it push back the start of rehearsal, but it can be frustrating for volunteers. On Wednesday nights, I don't leave, between 4:30 and 6:30. I'm here. Some people drove 30 minutes to get here after their full-time job. So do your best to honor your volunteers and your people who are serving. Make sure you've got everything that they need from the very beginning. So charts and music, and know your plan of attack. How are you going to go through rehearsal? It can be pretty straightforward, pretty simple to just start at the top of the service and work from your first song to song 2, song 3, song 4, whatever. There's nothing wrong with that, but maybe you want to do something a little bit more creative for one reason or another. So just know what you want to do from the very beginning. And, we can just run the song from top to bottom, but it can be so much more helpful for your people. There's a variation. Some people have listened to the music. Some people have it memorized when they show up for rehearsal. Others are looking at the name of the song for the first time. So maybe there are some trouble spots that hey, we're going to have to work on these 6 bars for a while. Have that kind of stuff picked out ahead of time. Work on those trouble spots so you can make any kind of reference to tracks or demos or anything like that ahead of time. Have your plan ready to go so that when you get started, there's no hiccups. You can just keep going, and you can give them the most information to succeed. Here at my church, we've got a great team of volunteers, and I pride myself on not being the best musician in that room. But it's not my job. It's not my role to be the best person there. I do need to be the most prepared, though. And I need to do everything that I can to make sure that they have all the tools that they need in their tool belt to succeed. So think through that ahead of time. So when rehearsal starts, they've got everything that they need. It also just makes rehearsal as smooth as possible. Last night we had a great rehearsal because there was some give and take. We actually accomplished things a little bit faster than normal, which never happens. And it allowed time. We weren't just stressing over making sure we got through the work. We had some time to talk and share a little bit more than normal. And if there hadn't been a plan, maybe that wouldn't have been possible. So that's a good thing to keep in consideration as well. Just another practical tip. Don't start with the hardest song. For one reason, maybe the vocal range is huge. Maybe there's a really intricate part for your horns or for your rhythm section. Don't start with the hardest song. Start with something that's familiar. And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. When you know your plan of attack, it's totally fine to go from song 1 to song 2, song 3. But maybe song 3 you've been doing with your team, and they know it and they know it well. And it can just be a nice warm up, especially as you're thinking through sound mixes and things like that. It can just be a great place to start that is familiar for them. It's a nice warm up, and not just for their instruments or for their voices, but also for their hearts, their minds. Again, I have people who drive in 30 minutes after their full-time job, and they fought with their kids on the way home or on the way to church or whatever, So it can just be a great tone setter to just start with something a little bit more familiar. So Michelle, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. So many good practical points there. And just kind of building off on what he said, a good thorough rehearsal and run through of the weekly music and all transitions. And I think running transitions is something that we can forget to do. We get busy and we just got to run this song. We got to run this song. And we forget about transitions because I think nothing can be more awkward than a clunky transition. And so I know for me, that's something that has been helpful, is remembering to really run those transitions. And I in my context, we are using tracks. And so even more so making sure that the tracks are going into the next one, and there's, that we're honoring the time in between. What does that look like? What is God doing in a moment? Do we need to stop it so we can pause this moment? And so when we're rehearsed really well and we feel comfortable, we can really press into those moments a little bit more, which is why those rehearsals are so important. In a dream scenario, every volunteer has practiced and is super prepared, and they come into rehearsal and it's, here we go, run it, and we're out. That's the dream scenario, which is not always the case. But something for me that and Jordan, you just hit on this, is really respecting our volunteers' time. I know for me, all my people are volunteers. And so this is just something they're doing. This is their ministry. This is their offering. And so I really want to respect their time. And so I don't want to dilly-dally. I don't want to, if I say we're going to start at this time, I want to start at that time. If I say we're going to end at this time, I want to end at this time. I want to respect them. And so I know for my volunteers at Grace Church, they really do. We rehearse Sunday mornings. Wednesday nights, I rehearse with the choir and I rehearse with the vocal. With the worship team, we work vocals with the tracks. And then on Sunday morning, the full band is there. And I think the understanding, the expectation is that I have given you these songs with enough time and you are prepared when we come in on Sunday morning, so that when we are running on Sunday morning, it's less like, what's that lead line again? And more, we're playing it. So any questions, as we give our people enough time, preparation, hopefully, if we're sending our songs on Saturday, maybe there's a reason why our people are unprepared, because they don't have enough time to prepare the song. So getting that stuff out with enough time, knowing when your rehearsal is, they have enough time earlier in the week to learn the music and be prepared, so that when they come into rehearsal, they can feel confident in their abilities at that moment. So yeah, working transitions, make sure you're really getting those ironed out, and not for the sake of, we're not trying to be perfect. But as we prepare those transitions and we feel confident, we can rest in a moment and be able to really be sensitive to what the Holy Spirit is doing in any moments. I can't tell you how many times I've said, stop that. I just want to pause this moment, because I feel like the Holy Spirit's doing something right here and I don't want to move from this moment. And so if we're really prepared, we can get out of our mind kind of what Sharon was saying, like preparation is so good. It allows us to be even more sensitive to the Holy Spirit's presence and what he wants to do among us. So, and another point, I feel like I'm not good at this. And so this is something I need to be better at, but any upcoming music, obviously the week to week happens and the focus is what's happening that morning. But if you have any new and upcoming songs, any new worship songs coming up in the next few weeks, and you have some time in a rehearsal, like, hey, we're doing this song 3 weeks out. Let's go ahead and learn it. We have some time. We've made some space in this rehearsal. Let's go ahead and start learning it today, so that 3 weeks from now, when we step into rehearsal, we're going to feel more confident about that. So I think that's a great point, as you're planning in advance, to be able to equip your volunteers to have that music ahead of time. And then I think this is such a good thing to remember, but being sure to call out good progress and other wins to keep our team encouraged. Wow. Such a good reminder to encourage our team members, to encourage our volunteers. I know that something I try and do at the end of every year around Christmas time is write a handwritten note to my band members. They're there every week. They are so faithful. They give up so much of their time in ministry. And I just try to write specific things, ways I've seen them grow each year, things that they bring to the team. Words of encouragement are so powerful. So if you can send a text each week, we talked about this earlier. Jordan had the volunteer Jovi who sang. How are ways that they're growing, ways that they've seen? I think like as we believe in our volunteers, as we encourage our volunteers, same thing what Nick said earlier about greeting your volunteers first thing. In a lot of ways, we set that tone in the morning. So if we're coming in sad and like tired and whatever, that is going to sift through our team. And so as we come in and encourage our people and we call out the things that we see, the good things that they're doing, the improvements they're making, that will flow through our team. That encouragement will lift everybody up. And so I think finding ways to encourage our people is so important. And Jordan already said this, but I just feel like I should hit it again. You may not be the strongest, most talented person on your team. And I think that's okay. You might be the only person on your team. For some of us, I don't know. I know we're all in different contexts. But it is true that we must be the most prepared. As the leader of the team, we have to step in with the most preparedness of anybody else, so that we are equipping our volunteers to succeed in what we are asking them to do each week. So if we come in and we're not ready and we're not giving them songs with enough time, we're kind of setting them up, not for failure, but you know what I mean, to not be as prepared as they could be. So we must be the most prepared, and we have to encourage our people. We have to give them shout outs. You know, I have a drummer who at first couldn't play with click, and today he plays with clicks and he can play with tracks and he's killing it and he's so good. And so reminding them, hey, I remember when you couldn't do this and you have grown so much, you have worked so hard. Thank you for taking the time to do this. Thank you that you have given yourself as an offering to this ministry. I appreciate it. Just words of encouragement go such a long way. So lots of cool practical ways to encourage our team and set them up for success each week.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Let's take just 2 questions and we'll wrap up. We made a commitment to do that and I want to honor that. And so I know that there's a lot of other questions here. If your question is not asked, it's not because it's not a good question. It's just a time thing. So I want you to understand that. But there is a question that I saw about introducing new songs and how you do that. Is there certain principles that you follow around introducing a new song to the congregation? So I'm going to open that for someone to answer. I don't know how you guys want to do that as a panel here, but anyone I think that wants to take that, jump right in.
I'll say a couple things just because I just introduced a new song last week. I just think this probably depends on your church, the culture of your church. I think some churches might be more willing and ready for new songs quicker than others. I know for me, I try to do about one new song a month. I kind of have a rhythm of I'll introduce it, we'll sing it for 2 or 3 weeks, take a week off, and then it's just part of our rhythm of songs. Getting it into the people's hands before you sing it. So I post any new songs on our Facebook page. If you have a Spotify playlist for your church, you can post that, but getting it to them before Sunday that you sing it so they can be learning it and singing it in their homes is a good way to encourage it. But again, I just think this comes back to your church's readiness to learn new music. One new song a month might be like, whoa, that's way too much. But what if you do a new song, every 6 weeks or every 2 months? Just kind of figuring out what's a good rhythm for your own church.
That's excellent. Thank you, Michelle. Let's
one other thing that might be helpful with that is introduce it in several ways. So if you have pre-service music, put it in that pre-service loop. If you have an announcement reel that goes out during the week, put it underneath that. Sing it without the congregation's participation necessarily, maybe a couple of weeks before you do it. And then as it's then it's something that's familiar, they've heard. And so try it in a different ways leading up to it so it won't feel as unfamiliar by the time you actually sing it.
That's excellent, Sharon. Thank you. So with that, there's a question here as it relates to songs and a rubric you have for evaluating the theological value of a new song and they have in parentheses or an old song. So is there something, how do you guys do that? I don't know what you're, maybe different for all of you, I don't know, but when it comes to evaluating the theological value of a song, and Sharon, I think you kind of brought up some of that and some of your things that you were saying earlier in the webinar. What does that look like?
On this very topic right now. Aren't you, Nick?
I missed the first part of that.
It's our rubric question, man. I'm just giving you a hard time. I know you're always doing great projects and things. I figured you were working on a book that had an answer to this very question on rubric for evaluating theological effectiveness of a worship tune. But look, man, seriously, we have one ultimate authority, right? And that is the Word of God. And I think anytime I've gotten into a weird place with a song and I'm like, I don't know about this, it's like, hey, maybe I need to understand what Jesus says about it first. And then I think I've heard lots of great things about what friends do. I've heard people develop like, hey, look, you got to consider, does it fit us? Michelle was talking about that. Does it fit us? Can we do this song? Like, can we even play this song? Sometimes I think it's great to stretch, but other times I think it's good to know your limitations. And then I've had another friend talk about an adoration scale. Like, how do we feel like this song really facilitates the idea of vertical worship, and to really understand that, I guess, in a theological sense of like, is this a horizontal song? Is this a gathering song? Or is this vertical adoration? So those are a couple of things that I've found just helpful off the cuff while I'm waiting for Nick to publish that book on his rubric.
Nick, did you have, since you got named, do you have something that you want to say?
No, I don't.
Fair enough.
So this may touch on another question that's kind of in the Q&A, but sometimes we have to consider the cultural background from where the song comes, because sometimes things can be phrased in a culture that we're not from, that makes us think a song isn't fitting. And I remember that because a friend of mine sent a song from some friends in Africa, and the wording was so off to me. It was like, well, I think it kind of feel like it means that. But then after sitting and thinking about it, it was like, well, this is a whole cultural paradigm that's a little different. So maybe how the song is being phrased, the way the sentence is being structured is just not familiar to me culturally, but it may still be a good song. And so sometimes teaching our people those kinds of things becomes helpful. The other question was, in a multicultural church, how do you infuse some different things? One, the first thing I'll say is you can't force it. Like, you can't force it. If you got one Black man in the congregation, please don't try to do no Ebonics or the next gospel tune just because you're trying to meet the need of that one Black man. That brother is probably doing just fine on his own. Thank you. But ain't no worse than hearing your culture butchered. You know what I'm saying? Like, there is nothing worse than that. And it's like, I appreciate it, but let's just stick to what we was doing. I can find what I need elsewhere. So I think you can't force it. And when you think about entering into another culture, become a student, before you try to become a teacher. And that's super important. You need to learn it and live with it a little bit. Then it'll make more sense. Daryl Seller said, I can't even, I'm telling the truth. I am. Every praise is not for everyone just because you don't want to do something.
That's
okay,
good.
I'm leaving now.
That's great. Well, I just want to say thank you to all of you here, Nick, Shaun, Michelle, Jordan, Sharon. Thank you for your time. And to everyone that's stuck with us to the end here, to the bitter end, we want to honor you and say thank you for investing in this time together with us. And we want you to know, we know that you all, whoever you are here, are coming from different places. And as has been said, some of you may feel alone because you may be the only worship leader in your church, but you're not alone. We're here with you. And so we just want you to know that part of the reason for doing this webinar is to say we're together and you're not alone. And we're going to be here for you. We're going to support you. We're going to be working on a course and trying to do things to support you, but we want to hear from you too. So don't get isolated in ministry. Let us come alongside you. And I know I speak for all of the panel here in saying that they would love to be an encouragement to you and support you as well. So we'll look forward to catching you on the next webinar, which will be in April on digital discipleship. We've got another panel for that, and you can be looking for that registration. And in the meantime, God bless, and you have a wonderful day.
Thank you for listening to the Holiness Today podcast. If you enjoyed this production and wish to hear more, visit holinesstoday.org/podcast or find us on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts.